So 5 months ago, you might have seen a pretty dramatic video go up on this channel. If you've not been around that long though, I'll catch you right up. Basically, I posted an entire 40-minute crash out about how I was going to be replotting and making major changes to my dystopian fantasy book. That video prompted what I would consider to be a completely new era in my writing career. And today we're going to unpack how the rewriting of this book, because it was a rewriting, has gone over the course of the last 5 months, some of the things that surprised me, and just this era of my writing journey, a real update on where I'm at and how things have been. One thing I did not account for when I set up for this video was having a spot to put my matcha down, which is really unfortunate. What are we talking about in case you didn't see the original video? So back in the beginning of June, I had a huge blow up realization about my book, my dystopian fantasy novel titled Unraveling, that I've been working on at this point for about 2 years. So at the time that this big blow up happened, it was June. I had been working on draft 3 for a couple months. And to give you the quick summary, essentially I was talking with my friend Caitlin. Shout out Caitlin if you're watching this video. Keep in mind, I was at the beginning of draft 3. This was the draft that I was planning to send to beta readers, but a lot of the changes I was making in draft 3 at the time were relatively minor. They were small cleanups. I wasn't thinking that the book needed a huge overhaul. And I was fully intending to spend what probably would have been several months just kind of doing this sort of polishing pass. I was talking to my friend Caitlin and we got into talking about the book in detail, the kind of detail that I hadn't gone into with anyone yet about the actual plot and what happened in the course of the story. And she started pulling at threads, poking holes, and it all kind of fell apart from there. I had huge realizations about things that needed to change on a world building level, a character motivations level, the book actually having a sense of stakes, momentum, and interwoven realization. Like, there were realizations in pretty much every aspect of the book. No part of the book was really solid, both in terms of like, I needed to make changes to Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, but also in terms of things needed to be changed with the characters, with the setting, with the world building, with what we were doing on a plot level. So much changed. It still resembled the previous book in a lot of ways. It wasn't like I was changing what the book was, really. A lot of the like checkpoints remained the same. For example, our midpoint is still very recognizable. We go to the same sort of locations in that sequence, for example. The ending, we're still in the same location doing similar things. But at the same time, so much changed. It's like the context is still recognizable, the bones are still recognizable, but everything about the way that it's fleshed out is different, if that makes sense. So that's what I've been working on for the past 5 months. Since the beginning of June, I really looked at draft 3 with new eyes. No longer was I thinking it was just this polish before I sent to beta. I was viewing it as the most intensive developmental work that I'd done on this story concept so far. I went back to the drawing board. I replotted the book in a chapter by chapter detailed outline. I made sure that there weren't going to be pitfalls and holes, hopefully, although of course there's always a chance that I missed something. This draft isn't going to be perfect, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. That's what happened in June. That was the origins of this blow up. Now I'm close enough to the end of finishing this rewrite now where I feel like I can really talk about it. I actually have a feeling the next vlog that you guys might see from me could be me finishing the book, or if not, coming very close. And I compiled some fun stats from TRACKBEAR. If you don't know, I use TRACKBEAR to track my writing progress. And these are kind of crazy. So this is counting the work that I did on draft 3 pre-blow up. So I started on draft 3 on March 30th with doing a read through of draft 2, making notes for the things that I wanted to change. Little did I know that all of it would be coming relevant because I'd be rewriting the entire book. But if we're counting from that start date, March 30th, to now, based on my TRACKBEAR stats, I've written 150 days out of 229, which is a stat that I'm really happy with. I mean, that's obviously more than half of the time. And on those 150 days, I've totaled 395 hours of work on the manuscript. So that means an average of 2.5 hours a day on the days where I did write. And if we were looking at an average, including the days I didn't write, I was averaging about 1 hour and 45 minutes a day, including the days where I wasn't even writing. So that feels pretty good to me. I mean, obviously there was wild fluctuation within that. There were obviously days where I was getting 0 hours. There was days that I was getting 8 or 12 hours. So the breadth of that has been wide, but I mean, I think those numbers really speak to just just how involved the writing process is, because I can't even fathom 395 hours on draft 3. I have to have put total over 1,000 hours into this manuscript so far, which is like slightly nuts to me. Now that we've talked stats, let's get into the thoughts and feelings, the best part, right? So first of all, I rewatched the initial blow up video, the crash out, if you will, and there are several things that I said that ended up just not being true. Firstly, I said that I was going to be rewriting portions of the book. I still kind of thought that I was going to be able to maintain certain chunks. That pretty much ended up not being true. Honestly, I would wager to say 90% of this draft was from scratch rewritten, which was definitely not what I was necessarily anticipating. So I would say there's like a couple chapters where I like actually kept a fair amount of the actual words on the page from past iterations. There was probably a couple chapters where I would call them heavily reworked, and then like literally the rest of the manuscript has been from scratch. Also, I'm realizing I intended to light these little candlesticks back here and I haven't. 1 second. What do you think? Are they even in the shot? It's kind of hard to tell. I think so. I don't know. Hopefully they're providing some ambiance. I would definitely say Act 1 has the most like resemblance to a past version of itself, but like all of Act 2 and Act 3, besides the occasional like line or paragraph that I remembered liking from a past version and brought into the draft, pretty much all of Act 2 and Act 3 I rewrote. And I'm going to say something crazy. This is something I would truly recommend. Like, I would really recommend rewriting. And here's why. Especially to a less experienced writer writing an early book or their first like finished book, I think this scrap and rewrite approach can actually be the best thing that you can do for the project. I think it challenges you and it pushes you to grow and do better the next time. I feel like I could have tried to wrestle and tweak what I had down from draft 1 to death, and it would have just felt overwrought, and it wasn't making the kind of improvements I needed it to make. It wasn't making the big strides I needed it to make. And honestly, I think that's a reason why, in hindsight, the second draft I did, draft 2, just feels like such a spinning my wheels time. I talked about throughout the process of draft 2, how it felt like kind of a struggle to feel like I was wrestling what I had from draft 1 because it was just at such a lower caliber. I'd grown so much in the year since I'd started that draft, and you change so much as a writer in your first few years of writing, and I'm sure throughout your entire career, but I think when you're starting your writing journey, and this is kind of, in my mind, the start of my like serious writing journey. Yes, I was writing stories when I was younger, but I just, I didn't know much at that time. You change so much in your first couple years of writing like seriously, and those leaps are so big that I actually think in some ways it's easier to release a draft that you wrote a year ago when you were like a vastly different writer and just see what you can do now. You might actually end up pleasantly surprising yourself. I hope I'm putting that into words properly, but don't be scared of a rewrite. I think even though I knew that this was going to be the best for the book back in June, I was definitely still scared to really commit to the idea of releasing and getting rid of so much of the work that I'd done. And that's natural, right? I'd spent over a year on the project at that point. The thought of starting from basically a blank document was crazy. But I think something that's important to remember is like when you do decide to do a rewrite, you're not actually wasting all of the work you've done up until that point, because your understanding of the project and your writing is going to be the most firm that it's been throughout the entire time of you working on that book. And all of the trial and error that you went through on your initial iteration, it's going to serve what you bring to the next version of the project. And that is super invaluable, Okay, I just took a pause from filming to go eat a baked potato. Our apartment complex was having a baked potato bar, kind of a sleigh. But we're back now. Another thing that I was just like dead wrong about back in June was I talked about how I thought that maybe I was going to try out almost like a zero draft-esque process, essentially trying out my new direction for the plot and the manuscript by doing more of a zero draft, which if you don't know, the way that I think of a zero draft, and I've heard other authors think of a zero draft, is basically a dialogue first draft where maybe you have stage directions and pieces of dialogue, but you're not threading everything together with prose. There's not a ton of interiority going on. You're really just figuring out the sort of bones of the manuscript, and then you're going to flesh them out later. In hindsight, when I think about why I wanted to do a zero draft, maybe there was some fear factoring into why I wanted to zero draft the new plot direction. I was scared to commit to this new direction of the book, even though I'd talked it through with a friend to make sure that it made sense and I'd plotted it. It was still really intimidating to think, okay, I'm about to embark on another 6-month redraft, because at that point, I just didn't really want to face that. Now, I know that people work on a manuscript for way longer than I've worked with this project, but at that point, I'd already been working on this manuscript for almost a year and a half, and there can be a lot of blows throughout the process of working on a manuscript where maybe you think you're closer than you really are, and then you get a humbling piece of feedback that makes you realize you're actually way earlier on the track than you thought, and that's really what this blow up was. It was a moment of, oh, I thought I was actually like past the 50% mark on this book, but I'm really not. The hardest work is ahead of me. And that ended up being true. Like, I think the rewrite that I did on this book has been the most like rigorous and challenging writing process of all 3 drafts that I spent on this book, including draft 1. In fact, draft 1 in hindsight may have been the easiest, breeziest process. To be honest, I didn't have that high of standards for it. And so obviously that was going to be more chill, you know? But yeah, I think I was just a little reluctant to really accept what I had ahead of me, and the thought of starting with a zero draft felt less intimidating, but I ended up not doing that at all. That was just like not what the process ended up being. And pretty much immediately when I started working on the manuscript again, that kind of got thrown out the window. What I kind of realized about my own personal writing approach through this redraft, as I was laying down the new plot, as I was laying down this new version of the book that felt like its own complete entity. This book in a lot of ways feels like a different book. I really viewed each sentence as like a brick that I was laying down, and I needed all of it, the interiority, the dialogue, the intricacies of the character relationships, the setting, the atmosphere. I needed all of it to really find this new iteration of the project. And it's so interesting because I think I've just learned that the sort of zero drafting mindset doesn't quite work for me, because I can't isolate pieces of the manuscript in that way. You know what I mean? I can't just think about the dialogue. It just doesn't really work with my brain. And this is something that I think I'm going to take forward into all my writing in the future. I think for me, something I'm learning about myself is that like the line level and the developmental is so intermeshed. And this was one of those things that like I had an inkling of earlier, but because you're constantly told the writing advice of focus on the developmental, ignore the line, like for the early stages of a book, until the developmental is solid, you're told to ignore the line, don't line at it as you go, like leave it alone. And so I think it took me a long time to accept that for me, in my brain, the line and developmental is actually much more intermeshed. I can only really nail the developmental if I'm paying a ton of attention to the line. And honestly, I really have Shaylin Wrights to thank for my change in mindset, and I'm still working on this. For a long time, I worried about having the right process, and I'm sure some of this comes from being on YouTube and also just being so new to writing, where it was like, when I heard a piece of writing advice, something like don't edit as you go, I really took that to heart. And if I wanted to edit as I go, I would like shame myself out of it. I'd be like, no, you're not supposed to go back, stop. And I was really resisting my natural instincts in my writing process out of this idea of what my writing process was supposed to look like based on writing advice that's not a one-size-fits-all. And something that I really like about Shaylin Wrights and how she talks about craft in her content is she's very adamant about the fact that there is no one right process. So another thing that has come out of this redraft process is me kind of letting go of timelines. I'm someone who's pursuing self-publishing. To be honest, I just got really tired and really exhausted with trying to project and trying to put dates and times onto things that in truth, I had no idea how long they were going to take. And that includes this draft, but it also includes the book like timeline overall. Because the truth is that I've never done this process before. If I had published 5 books already and actually knew how long this dance takes me, that would be different and it would be more fair for me to try and make those projections. But I have no idea what it's going to take to get my book from where it's at now now to being publishing ready. And I just got so tired of trying to set deadlines only to realize that they didn't make sense or weren't realistic. It was discouraging me for no reason, even when I knew in my gut and heart that I was making really good progress with the book. If it didn't match up the arbitrary, invented timelines that I was setting in front of me, it left me feeling discouraged even when I should have felt proud. I'm gonna make a whole video soon enough about like why I've kind of let go of the idea of efficiency as a writer. My new process that I used during this rewriting included things like frequently going back to the beginning and like combing through the whole thing again, giving myself lots of context, especially if I was going to write a pivotal, highly emotional moment, editing as I went in different ways. Sometimes I would go back and edit the last few chapters. Sometimes I would literally go back to chapter 1 and catch back up to where I was writing actively. And those things do not align with trying to get the book done, the draft done as fast as physically possible. And I don't even know when that started feeling like a goal of mine, but I really want to release it. I still feel strongly that I want to actively work on self-publishing this project. I just don't want to let pressure and this sense of urgency, this sort of manufactured urgency that comes from the like go, 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 work hard and fast culture, like hustle culture, for lack of a better term. I don't want to let that make me miserable throughout the writing process, because truly the most blissful times of working on this redraft were the times where I like literally forgot about that. I don't have the mental space for worrying about when this draft is done. I'm just going to keep working on it, not really even checking in with anyone, because sometimes that can stress me out. Sometimes I just want to work on it silently in my cafe alone for like a week, not giving anyone progress updates, not trying to hit a goal, just blissfully engaging with the story. Those were the happiest times of writing in this draft for me. And I'll self-publish when I'm ready to, you know? While we're talking about the publishing side of it all, I actually have something for the trad pub girlies today. If you're someone who's interested in getting your book traditionally published, I want to introduce you to a conference that's going on in the month of November that you might be interested in. So my friends over at Reedsy Learning reached out to me about their How to Get a Publishing Deal conference. And I was really excited to share it with you guys because I feel like this could be such a great resource if you are someone who's interested in pursuing traditional publishing. Thank you so much to Reedsy Learning for sponsoring this video. So the How to Get a Publishing Deal conference is taking place on November 16th, and it's from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., so 4 hours of content. And if you attend, you will hear from editors, literary agents, published authors who will be sharing their knowledge through presentations and panel talks all about the traditional publishing process. Each presentation will also be followed by a live Q&A so that you can ask all your questions. And all of this is virtual, so you can attend from everywhere. Also, if you're not available at the specific date and time, if you buy a ticket, you will also get access to the replays. Some of the topics that you can expect if you choose to attend include what catches an agent's eye when you're querying, advice for submitting to big 5 publishers, but also small presses, insights on what drives an editor to acquire a manuscript, and just like the different paths that you can take to acquire a traditional publishing deal. Tickets for the event are $99, or you could get access to it through a Reedsy Learning membership, which is $249 annually and gets you 12 months of access to all of Reedsy Learning's masterclasses and events. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, feel free to use the link down in my description to check out the How to Get a Publishing Deal conference. You also do get a like querying focused ebook if you attend the conference. I'm personally going to be attending so that I can share some like highlights and takeaways with you guys later in the month. And even as someone pursuing indie publishing, I have no doubt that I'm going to get a ton of value from the industry professional insights. So we'll be circling back on my takeaways from the conference, but if you're interested in attending with me, all the information will be down in the description. Thank you again to Reedsy Learning for sponsoring this video. Okay, I'm gonna say a little bit of a hot take now. I feel like this redraft has really taught me that self-doubt can really be a good thing. I'm going to qualify that, asterisk it, whatever. Not all self-doubt is good. In fact, most of it's bad. But specifically, a certain kind of self-doubt can be helpful. Obviously, my confidence was really shaken when I got this feedback. But when I look back on the last several years of my life, not just in writing, but in other creative pursuits or pursuits in general, so many of my big growth spurts were spurred by a moment of insecurity. And I talked about this a little bit in my like writing is hard, own it video many moons ago, but having a moment of dissatisfaction with your writing can make you seek out more challenge, more knowledge, it pushes you to try and reach the place you want to be. That sort of friction and tension and the gap between where you're at as a writer now and where you want to be, how good you want the manuscript to feel, how punchy you want it to be, how clean. That gap, in my experience, can be quite a motivator. The amount of times where you're fulfilling that expectation for yourself really does increase the longer you spend working at it, in my experience. Because when I wrote draft 1 of this book, I was constantly feeling like there's this massive ability gap between where I'm at and where I want to be. I'm looking up here at what I want this manuscript to feel like, and I can't write at that level. And that frustration, it was hard, but I also think the longer I pushed, the more I kept practicing, slowly that gap started to reduce a little bit. And it's kind of a moving goalpost, right? Because like, I thought I had improved a ton before I got this feedback, then getting the feedback like shot the goalpost up and I felt this big gap again, but then I closed it. And it's like this little ladder where you keep moving up each time you close that gap a little bit. And in order to keep seeing that new ceiling, you have to be challenged by your work, by another person, by something. Because if you think that your work is amazing and perfect all the time, you're never going to try to change your approach or the way you're doing things, and you're not going to seek out new information. You're not going to be receptive to writing advice, and then you stay stagnant. You know, you might have some natural improvement just from practicing running your wheels. But while I think practice is valuable, I also think fresh insight, a different lens, a piece of feedback, all of those things can be completely transformative. And I think that the challenge of being confronted with all of the weaknesses of my draft from an outside lens, a new perspective, it gave me that new goalpost. And I feel like the last 5 months was me rising to meet it and seeing myself do things that I didn't know that I could do as a writer. And that was invaluable, because if I had kept spinning my wheels on draft 3 and just went off of what I could see and just kept trying to make marginal improvements the same way I had in draft 2, I don't think I would have set a new ceiling for myself. I would have just kept operating in this like more limited space of what I thought I could achieve and what I thought my standards were. And this book would be much worse off for it. So I think one of the worst things for your writing can be just like stagnancy and not bringing in fresh things to influence you, honestly. Like, not only was this feedback instrumental, but something else that I've done a lot more in draft 3 is like reading, so that I'm being influenced by the things that I'm consuming, casually consuming craft content. I think something that held me back so long in terms of craft improvement was I thought that in order to engage with craft content or craft information, I had to be like sat down with a pencil and paper, like ready to take notes. And because of that, I never did it because I wasn't carving out the time to do that. But when I realized like, actually I can just throw on a craft video from someone like Shaylin, who's writing advice I really trust, while I'm doing my dishes, the stuff that I'm absorbing through osmosis, game changer. And it's giving me new approaches and lenses to view writing that could change the way that I approach my next chapter. But if you're not giving yourself that new material, whether that's through the form of feedback or reading or new advice, you're going to be kind of swimming in the same things that you already know and the same things you've already done. Having something fresh, a new lens, a new thing to experiment with, because I think some of my best writing in this draft came from moments where I pushed myself to experiment and try something I hadn't done before. If you don't have that, you're just going to keep like kneading the same dough in the same way. And that's how you end up with a manuscript that feels like over-edited, overwrought. You're trying to perfect something that maybe wasn't that good in the first place. And it just ends up being like a painful, uninspired process. And if we compare like draft 2 and draft 3, drafts that took the same amount of time, those drafts are not the same in terms of the amount of growth. And it really is, I think, because I was more challenged in draft 3, because I got feedback, because the plot changes were substantial, because I just on a personal level was trying to challenge myself more when I sat down with the manuscript instead of just viewing this as like, I'll just see what I can do. You know what I mean? All those factors I think contributed to why same amount of time, maybe similar amount of writing practice, there's a drastically different outcome between what I attempted to do in draft 3 versus draft 2. Okay, another thing that I wanted to chat about is perfectionism as a writer and my kind of complicated thoughts. The first thing that I'll say, again, maybe a hot take, I think perfectionism is overused as something that we discuss in the writing community, meaning that I think sometimes we look at anyone who's being meticulous and immediately go, perfectionism, stop being a perfectionist, cut it out. I think I've been like pretty perfectionistic about this draft in the sense that I've refused to leave anything on the page that I dislike. I've agonized at times over a paragraph or a line, and some people might look at that and view it as inefficient, as perfectionistic, but I actually think that 95% of the time that perfectionism served this draft well. It allowed it to be cleaner. It allowed it to be at a quality that I can feel confident behind. And sometimes I think you kind of need to be a perfectionist with writing, because if you want it to be at a good caliber, the level of intention and attention that you put into the sentences, the paragraphs, the scenes directly correlates with the quality of the manuscript. And so I think people are really quick to throw around the term perfectionism whenever someone is just either taking their time or being really meticulous. And I don't think it's always the case. In fact, I think sometimes a good dose of perfectionism can really help you push yourself to have a high standard, which I think is a net positive. That being said, there's of course bounds to this, as there is with everything, right? Because something else that I've kind of realized on the flip side of that coin is there will always be more. There will always be more. And part of my draft 3 process working on the rewrite has been a lot of going back to the beginning and combing back through. I think that has been a net positive. I think it's been really beneficial. But something that I learned through that rhythm is that every single time I go back to the beginning, there's a whole other level that I want to pull the book up to, if that makes sense. And what I kind of realized is like, that's never going to end. The problem with a novel, because it's such a large project, and because, especially in early years as a writer, you're growing so much so quickly, every time you go back to the beginning and look at it again, you're going to have grown. And so it's like, you could keep doing that cycle of going back to the beginning, updating everything based on your current skill level. Great, now through doing that, you've gotten better. Go back to the beginning, update everything based on your current skill level. Oh shoot, we've gotten better again. And this is a great thing in the sense that, wow, that constant improvement, love it. You're practicing, you're getting better, but there does obviously need to be a cutoff point. And something I've had to do as I come to the end of draft 3 and I've continued, doing passes, writing new material, doing my whole song and dance of how I've approached this draft, is I've had to accept like, okay, there needs to be a point where we're like, this is where we're cutting ourselves off. I'm going to lock the whole beginning portion of the manuscript. And it doesn't matter if when I get to the end, I think, oh, I could have done the beginning better. We have to cut it off at some point, because I don't want to make the mistake again of waiting too long to get feedback. So that has definitely been something that I've had to confront. The pros and cons of my quote perfectionism with this draft is like, I want to be intentional, a bit, what's the word? A bit like high strung in a sense about the quality of writing. That's just, I've always been that way, like back in school and stuff. I cared a little bit more than was sensical about the quality of the work I was doing, okay? And I think that that is a net positive, like truly. But we have to keep that within bounds and not let it interfere with like the dreams and what we're trying to achieve. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, it's like, you could always find more. You could always find more to change, but it's going to be more valuable to go to that next step and give myself that fresh insight of taking this book to betas, which is the next step. That's going to be more valuable than doing another pass of polish. And we got to remember that sometimes. Even though I don't regret any of the work I've done on this book, every hour that I spend working on it, thinking about it is progress. And I try to hold that mindset dear, because I don't ever want to feel like writing is about rushing to the next stage, because I definitely have found value in slowing down a little bit and embracing whatever the process is naturally looking like. But there's bounds to it. And we also have to remember, like, don't forget the value of those fresh insights. It doesn't need to be perfect to go to beta readers. And I think that's something I've struggled with, which I think unlocks another discussion, which is a little bit around kind of the fear of finishing the draft. And I'm curious if anyone can relate to this, but I have noticed myself dragging my feet quite a bit when it comes to writing the ending. I struggle to parse my feelings out here, because I think it's a combination of reasons why I've been like a little bit scared of writing this ending. Endings are intimidating. You need to tie everything together. It's kind of just a hard part of the book to do. Like, I think there is a true element of like, I want to go into the ending as equipped as I can be. So I'm going to like do my final pass of the first and second act to make sure that I'm really solid going into the finale in terms of where our characters are at emotionally. Like, I think all of that is true and valid, but I also think that there's an element swimming up in my brain up here, a part of me that's a little bit scared maybe of the beta stage. Why? Because I just did, as we've discussed, a ground up rewrite of the book. And I think that there probably is a part of me that's like, I know that this is the absolute best that I could do right now. Like, I gave this draft my all. I put my heart and soul into it. I put my 395 hours or whatever we said. Was it 395? Yeah, 395 hours. I put 395 hours of my life into this. I pushed myself. I challenged myself. I did the damn best that I could. And so there is a little bit of like, if this is still not enough, that's just going to be so defeating. And I love and believe in the idea that you grow into the writer that you need to be to take the book to the next level. Like, just because this is the best I could do right now doesn't mean that this will be the best that I can do forever. I think a comment actually on the June video, the initial blow up video, said like, every time I write a book, I grow into the writer I need to be to write that book. And I love that mindset. And I'm kind of viewing it similarly when it comes to each draft. But I do think there's a little bit of a fear of like, what if it's still not good enough? And I know that that's not a healthy mindset. I'm a developmental editor myself. And I know that, one, your manuscript is never not going to have problems, especially a redraft. Like, I probably created other issues, you know what I mean, through fixing like the initial issues. So I'm under no delusion that this manuscript is going to be like, great, good work. Like, my beta readers are going to have nothing to say. Of course not. There's going to be tons of notes, hundreds of comments, right? But I do think that there's like that little element of like, because I poured so much of myself into this and made such a big move, took the time to like ground up, rewrite it, I just really want it to work. I want this to be the version that moves forward, obviously with tweaks and edits, but I want this plot to work and I want it to be impactful. And I want my beta readers to read it and feel the emotions at the very least. And I'm scared that that might not be the case. I'm scared that things won't land or hit the way I want it to. This feels like such a vulnerable draft because I really did pour myself into it. And I got it to a place where I'm really proud of a lot of what's on the page in a way that I honestly wasn't in draft 1 and draft 2. Like, I thought when I reread draft 2 that I was like proud, but I was proud in the sense that I'd done a decent job of like brushing up what was there. I wasn't proud in the sense that I actually thought, oh, these characters are strong, this story is strong. I feel that much more now. There are still definitely quirks of this project that are just kind of like tied into the premise and I need to include, but that I'm not in love with anymore. And that's something that I've had to accept. As a whole, like, I actually really like what I've done with it. And so that almost makes it feel more vulnerable going into feedback. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, oh, I'm actually like really content with this. And, you know, it'll probably be just as it was back in June, another sort of humbling experience that pushes me to grow because that's what feedback is in general. But I wonder if that's part of the reason why I've been a little hesitant to finish it. I'm scared that I won't stick the landing, and I just really, really want betas, even though I know they will have plenty and plenty of critical feedback, I want them to see some spark of something in the manuscript and be like, oh, you did good work here, you know? And I, of course, want my betas to be completely honest with me. I wouldn't want them to tell me that was the case if it wasn't, but I want that to actually be the impact that they feel. And I think that also probably ties into the perfectionism I've had with this draft is I'm like, there's some pressure from the fact that I did this big rework where I'm like, I feel like people are expecting it to be good. And like, I think it's good and I'm really proud of the work that I did, but it does feel like this pressure because I'm like, you know, I did this big overhaul. I hope it sticks. I hope it sticks the landing. Going into feedback, it's almost like you can't win because there's two ends of the spectrum. It's like, if you give your readers something that's like kind of half-baked or like that you haven't done a ton of rigorous rounds on, when you get feedback back, you might be frustrated because you're like, oh, I could have fixed that. Like, why didn't I do more before handing it over? Then you feel embarrassed. Then you feel shame because they saw this version of the book that you're not proud of. And then on the other end, if you really try to make it as polished as possible before giving it to beta readers, one, you run the risk of waiting too long to get feedback. Hello, that's exactly what happened to me 6 months ago. Or two, you give them this polished thing, there's still inevitably going to be notes, and then you're frustrated because you're like, oh my God, I thought it was good. I thought it was there and it wasn't. Like, how could I be so blind? So basically my point is that feedback is hard no matter what. And so therefore I should get over my fear of it. But do you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of hard regardless. And of course, the best case scenario would be like, maybe you hit it right in the middle, or your manuscript is so good that your beta readers are like, wow, you know, bow down. But that's not realistic. And I know this because literally I'm a developmental editor. I know this firsthand. There's always going to be notes, and it doesn't mean necessarily anything about the kind of writer that the person is. I've had brilliant manuscripts come across my table, like things that I've worked on that I was so passionate about that really emotionally impacted me. I loved the characters. I felt moved by the story, but there was still hundreds of comments on those manuscripts. It's kind of inevitable, you know what I mean? And it kind of goes back to that thing of like, no matter how much work you do, there will always be more work to be done. It's just like constant cycling. Obviously, there will get to a point where generally there's less notes, there's less problems, but you could always keep digging, picking. But anyway, I think I need to do a little bit of a better job practicing what I preach in terms of some of my nerves around getting the feedback on this rewrite, because like we've established, nothing prompts an elevation and growth like a bit of a challenge and a new confronting, challenging perspective. And I know that's what's going to happen when I give it to betas, you know? If I could go back and I could address the 5 months ago version of me that had just gone through these realizations, was feeling a little bit downtrodden, beaten down by the writing process, and just didn't know what was ahead of her. And honestly, really thought like, oh, this book is a steaming pile of garbage. Like, I really at that point had accepted the weakness of the manuscript. If I could go back and talk to that version of her, I would say, you are about to write some of the best moments, scenes, paragraphs of your life. I'm getting chills. You are going to have the most euphoric, incredible writing moments. You are going to change what you thought you were capable of. It's going to be hard at times, but it's also going to be really fun. It's going to be the most fun you've ever had as a writer. You're going to push yourself, you're going to challenge yourself, and you're going to build a relationship with writing that you've never had before. And it's going to be so worthwhile. You're not going to regret it at all. And I kind of knew that, but like, wow, do I think that this was the right decision? And despite my slight fears when it comes to getting feedback, I'm also really excited to hear reactions to this version of the manuscript. And I know after experiencing this, and just like my writing journey over the past 2 years so far, that no matter what gets thrown at me in the feedback stages, it's only going to help me grow. Even the moments that are defeating, even the comments that hurt, they only help you grow, especially if you're getting it, you know, from trusted people. That's a huge part of this that I really emphasized in the first video and want to reemphasize here. Don't get feedback from people who like literally crush your spirit like a grape. I've gotten that kind of feedback too, and that did not help me grow. So let's create that distinction. But so much of critical feedback can be the fuel that you need to go to that next level and to raise your own standard. So that's the writing update. The manuscript is over 100,000 words in its latest iteration, and I'm so glad I rewrote it. I would recommend a rewrite to everyone. I think it's an amazing writing exercise. So much of what I loved about the initial seed of this idea is there and emphasized in this new version of the book, but I was able to discard a lot of the things that were weaker, flimsier, that just weren't my best work, my best ideas. Don't be scared of it. The rewrite is your friend. You shouldn't fear the rewrite should fear you. And honestly, it might not even end up being the crazy commitment that it sounds like. Yes, it's intimidating, but like I said, it took me the same amount of time pretty much to do this rewrite as it took for me to do just like a regular developmental revision. This is not me just trying to talk you into a rewrite. I know it's not right for every book and every process. And honestly, I really hope that I don't have to do this every time. But I do think if you are struggling with the project or you think that there's major issues, sometimes a rewrite could be a game changer. I was definitely someone who was scared of rewrites, and now I've really seen the value. So I get it. The people who have rewrites as a huge part of their writing process, I understand. I really do. Frankly, I think it's a lot more fun than a million rounds of painful revision. You can actually get a better product, in my experience, from just saying, scrap that, throwing it in the toss bin, let's try again. And I hold on to all my old drafts. Even if I delete like a paragraph, I always have like a dump document that I throw it in, just so I know that I'm never really losing anything. But like that delete button, dude, not just in terms of like redrafting a whole book, but like if you don't like a scene of your manuscript, delete it. If you don't like a paragraph, delete it. This is another thing that I picked up from Shaylin. She's honestly just been very influential in my writing mindsets lately. I've really gotten into the mindset with this draft of like, I want to like everything on the page. If I don't like it, it's not worth it. And if I have to delete something that includes important information, I might come up with a way to convey that information in a way that I like later down the line. I would rather just delete it now and not have anything that makes me roll my eyes when I look at the page, because for me, keeping morale high and keeping yourself feeling motivated and confident in the work you're doing is important, and only having things that I like on the page helps a ton with that. So get familiar with that delete button. Don't be afraid to toss things. If something's not working, throw it out and try again. Do it in a different way. Give yourself a new approach to the scene. Throw your characters on a rooftop instead of having them sit on the bed of a bedroom. This was actually a change that I made recently that completely transformed my approach to a scene and made it so much better. I'm frequently deleting in my process now, and I think, especially as an early writer, I definitely fell into this trap. I had this mindset of like, I can't waste the words. I can't waste the words. Like, why would I want to waste words that I worked so hard for? And I just think as you get later in your writing journey, you realize that it's not that like precious, and you can write new words that you like better. So yeah, delete the old ones. Saving it, of course, in a safe place in case you ever want to go back to it. Yeah, delete things. Try again. Scrap it. Go back to the drawing board. Try a different angle. If it feels like you are having to wrestle with something to make it work, you might need a different approach. You might need the scene to be in a different setting. I find that whenever writing really feels like a struggle, there's something broken. There's something that needs to be tossed and redecided. You know? Anyway, I would love to hear from you guys. If you resonated with any of the feelings or thoughts that I expressed in this video, if you've gone through anything similar with your own writing projects, tell me about it down below. One of my favorite things about the initial video I made was so many people chiming in with their own experiences, telling me about their own times that they've had to blow up books. So if you have any reflections, please share them down below. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, comment down below. The rewrite is your friend. I love that, actually. Once again, thank you to Reedsy Learning for sponsoring. If you want to check out the How to Get a Publishing Deal conference, all of the details will be in the link below, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye, guys.